Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back to Abnormal Voyages. My name is David, and today we bring you another cemetery safari. We're going to dive in to some more unusual and quirky stories from the grave. We begin today's investigation in Philippi, West Virginia, with a pair of modern-day mummies. Tag along.
We're going to a place that you've never heard of before. It's Abnormal Voyages. You're gonna learn something new. We're gonna open new doors. It's Abnormal Voyages.
Welcome to the Barber County Historical Museum. This is where we find our two mummies. Now, while interesting, the story of these mummies is much more sad than scary. It all begins with a local farmer by the name of Gran Hamrick. Mr. Hamrick had developed an obsession with mummies and how exactly the Egyptians had created them. Throughout his research, he eventually developed a process to make his very own mummies. He tried it on a couple of small animals at first, and finally he decided it was time to finally make some human mummies. But where was he going to find bodies to do this? Well, he turned to the local insane asylum. In those days, women could be admitted for pretty much anything that their family or partners wanted to put them in there for, so a lot of people found themselves unjustly kept inside. Mr. Hamrick called them up and inquired if there were any bodies available, and it turns out the asylum had two recently deceased females who the bodies had never been claimed. They'd been left there by their families and then never acknowledged after that. So they gladly sold him the bodies, and he performed his mummification process on both of these ladies. Though his process was not the same as the Egyptians, as certain things differed, such as he didn't pull out all the organs the way the Egyptians did, it still created two very functional mummies. Of course, lots of people wanted to know exactly how he did it, but Graham Hamrick was very secretive and refused to ever give out his exact recipe. He went to the grave without ever disclosing his mummy recipe. As for the two mummies, they gained a little bit of fame all on their own, at one point even traveling with Mr. Barnum himself as an oddity that was showcased. But eventually, they found themselves in a simple home that somebody kept them in storage. A flood happened, and they did luckily survive, but that made the owners realize they've got to do something with these. And that is how these two lovely ladies ended up here at the museum. Though they were abandoned, now they have many admirers. Sticking with the theme of mummies for just a little bit longer, we now head to Guthrie, Oklahoma for a very wild western tale. Here at Summit View Cemetery, we find the final resting place of Elmer McCurdy, a bandit whose true story and claim to fame didn't happen until well after he passed away. Elmer attempted to turn to a life of robbery and crime, but unfortunately for him, was not very good at being a bandit. He never managed any big scores, and all he got for his trouble was shot. The police brought his body to the local mortuary, where his remains were embalmed with an arsenic-laced ultra-preservative that allowed the body to last in a strikingly lifelike condition pretty much indefinitely. It was to remain like this until family came to collect the remains. However, nobody ever showed up, so the funeral home began showcasing him as kind of an example of their work, and people actually paid to get to see this body. Once it became obvious that there was money to be made here, his two long-lost brothers showed up to claim the body, and wouldn't you know it, it turns out they were not his brothers, just con men that wanted the corpse. From there, Elmer McCurdy became a sideshow attraction, his corpse being transferred all over the country, switching hands and making money the entire way. This continued up until 1976. Because in that year, a film crew was moving around props in California at a place they were filming, when suddenly the arm fell off a dummy, and it turns out it wasn't a dummy. It was a real dead body. After a lengthy identification process, Elmer McCurdy's embalmed corpse was returned here to Guthrie, Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Mummy. Our next grave finds us in Mannington, West Virginia, at the Highland Cemetery. This is supposedly the final resting place of a witch. Though legend says she was known as Zelda, Serlinda Jane, or even Sarah Jane, her tombstone reads Cerilda Jane Wetzel. And one of the first things you may notice is that her grave is facing the opposite direction of every single other one in the cemetery. Another quirk is that engraved on it is a staircase that, instead of leading up to heaven, seems to actually descend down into a fiery abyss. It's claimed that people have seen the shadowy figure of this witch near the grave, but when approached, she quickly disappears. Whether Cerilda was a real witch or not, we may never know, but to explore it further, we now head to Florida. Here in Tallahassee, at Old City Cemetery, we find the grave of Elizabeth Budd Graham, or as legend knows her, the double-dead White Witch of Tallahassee, Florida. It's obvious from many of the tokens and trinkets left at this grave that there are many who believe she indeed was a witch. Elizabeth Budd Graham passed away at the young age of 23 years old, and the husband she left behind was so distraught that he paid a handsome amount for this gorgeous stone to be erected here. But many believe that perhaps he was entranced by a spell, and that is what made him so desperate to be with her. Besides the fact that her tombstone faces west as opposed to east like all good Christians should be, another factor that points to her being a witch is the poem that is inscribed on her tomb. It is a passage from Edgar Allan Poe's Lenore, and it reads, "Ah, broken is the golden bowl, the spirit flown forever. Let the bell toll, a saintly soul floats on the Stygian river. Come, let the burial rite be read, the funeral song be sung, an anthem for the queenliest dead that died so young, a dirge for her the doubly dead, in that she died so young." Believers of Elizabeth being a witch point to the lines, "the spirit flown forever" and "floats on the Stygian river" to mean that her spirit is kind of trapped between life and death, because a witch's spirit isn't able to cross the Stygian river, which of course separates life from death. Then we have the verse, "for her the doubly dead," because a witch apparently has to be killed twice before being truly dead. And then the line, "the queenliest dead," refers to the fact that a witch is kind of queen of the dead. Either way, it makes for a fascinating story, and this beautiful memorial has become one of the most visited graves in all of Florida. It's stories like these that spur certain individuals to get out there and try to discover the truth. Two such individuals we found here in Connecticut. Welcome to Monroe, Connecticut, at the Stepney Cemetery. This is where we find Edward and Lorraine Warren. Fans of horror movies may recognize these names as being the two central characters of the Conjuring movie universe. Well, their real life was much like those movies and more. Ed and Lorraine devoted their lives to researching the paranormal side of things and helping those in need. They founded NESPR, the New England Society for Psychic Research, and in their time became two of the most prominent demonologists and paranormal investigators the world has ever seen. Their real-life adventures contained not only the investigation at the Conjuring House, but also Annabelle, the demonically possessed doll, and the Amityville Horror House. They are thought to have tangled with hundreds of spirits and demons in their time, and learned more than possibly anybody so far when it comes to paranormal research. Though they have both passed on now, Nesper still remains to continue the work that they started, and they've inspired countless other paranormal researchers who still carry that flag of trying to discover the real truth in the darkness. Though it is currently closed, they actually had a museum where all of their artifacts found throughout their adventures were kept and you could go and visit them. Hopefully someday we'll be able to get in there and take a closer look at the case files of the Warrens. But for now, we keep moving and find ourselves in Appleton, Wisconsin. This is Riverside Cemetery and is the final resting place of Kate Blood. Now, with a name like that, it's no surprise that a few legends cropped up around her. People have claimed to see apparitions of Kate Blood and others here, as well as those who approach on a full moon night will witness actual blood oozing from the face of this tombstone. One of the most popular stories behind Kate is that she took an axe and killed her husband and children. However, if you look at the dates that are on the stone, her husband lived a much longer time than she did, so it's hard to believe that she murdered him. Nevertheless, tales of supernatural happenings continue to abound here. It also doesn't help that these stones are placed pretty far away from the rest of the graves here at the cemetery. Very lonely and a little creepy out here all on its own next to the river. If Kate indeed did not murder anybody, it begs the question of why does her ghost keep appearing here? Or is it even Kate? Maybe another specter just chose this plot of land to be the one that they hung out around. Regardless of who the ghost is or what happens here, make sure you're careful if you happen to be around on a full moon. You just might accidentally step in a pool of blood. Another grave you may not want to find yourself at night is here at the Evergreen Cemetery in New Haven, Connecticut. This is where we find the final resting place of Mary Hart, or as legend remembers her, Midnight Mary. The writing on her headstone tells the story of her death at high noon just from and about to renew her daily work in her full strength of body and mind. Mary E. Hart, having fallen prostrate, remained unconscious until she died at midnight, October 15th, 1872. Above that, in a much more intimidating black font, it reads, "The people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away." According to legend, Mary did indeed collapse and was pronounced dead at midnight of that same day. After that, her family quickly had her buried. But later, her sister had a terrible nightmare that Mary was still alive, that she was in her casket, gasping for breath, trying to escape. These dreams were so vivid that the family agreed to dig Mary back up just so that there could be some peace of mind. When they opened the coffin, however, they found Mary with a terrified look on her face and nail marks on the coffin lid, where she was trying desperately to get away. It seems while she had passed out, she wasn't dead, and they had buried her alive. Following this super brutal way of dying, Mary's ghost now roams this cemetery. And it's said that if you're here at midnight, you too might catch a glimpse of her. But be careful, you don't want her dragging you back down with her. And now for our final stop In today's cemetery safari, we remain here in Connecticut at the Evergreen Cemetery. Not too far away from Midnight Mary, we have the final resting place of Sarah Winchester. No doubt you've heard the name Winchester before, and likely know that they are famous for the Winchester Repeating Arms Company that put out countless guns into the world. Miss Sarah Pardee married William Winchester, and that meant when he passed away, she inherited the whole company. And while that meant Sarah had just inherited a massive load of money, her life was not easy. First, she happened to lose a child. Soon after, her husband passed away. It seemed that death was following Sarah wherever she went. This was not something that Sarah wanted, of course, so she contacted a medium to help her figure out what was going on. And it turns out, Sarah was the target of all the spirits who had passed away due to the guns manufactured by the Winchester Company. The only way Sarah could stop the spirits from killing her too was to move far away and build a huge, massive, mysterious house. But that, my friends, is a story for another voyage. Thanks for tagging along on this cemetery safari. My name is David, and this is Abnormal Voyages. See you next time.